The morning of April 16, 1945, broke gray and humid over the Pacific waters northwest of Okinawa. Quartermaster Second Class Aristide Foutrides sat hunched over his logbook at Radar Picket Station Number 1. Sweat already beaded on his forehead despite the early hour. The USS Laffey cut through moderate swells 30 miles from the main battle zone. At exactly 07:27 hours, the radar operator's voice crackled through the humid air. Single contact approaching from the north. Range 12 miles. Speed 180 knots. Altitude 4,000 feet. The blip appeared as a small green dot on the circular screen. Steady. Unwavering. Moving closer. Foutrides reached for the sound-powered telephone with deliberate precision. His fingers found the familiar weight of the handset. The 19-year-old son of a Greek Orthodox pastor from Seattle had no way of knowing what this moment would unleash. That single radar contact would trigger the most savage kamikaze assault ever directed against one American warship. General quarters would sound within minutes. Klaxons would wail through every compartment. Men would race to battle stations they had drilled at countless times. But nothing in their training had prepared them for what approached through the morning haze. The next 80 minutes would test every man aboard beyond human endurance. 22 Japanese aircraft would throw themselves at the destroyer in waves of coordinated fury. Naval historians would spend decades trying to understand how any ship could survive such concentrated assault. This was Operation Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums. The Imperial Japanese Navy had mobilized over 3,000 aircraft for mass suicide attacks against the American fleet off Okinawa. The name came from the emblem of 14th-century samurai Kusunoki Masashige, a warrior who chose death over surrender when defeat became inevitable. These operations represented Japan's final desperate gamble. Stop the American advance toward the home islands or die trying. 7 major Kikusui operations had already been launched. Hundreds of American ships bore scars from previous attacks. Dozens rested on the ocean floor. But no single vessel had faced what the Laffey was about to endure. The destroyer's Allen M. Sumner-class hull displaced 2,200 tons of seawater as she maintained 25 knots. Her wake spread white behind her stern. Salt spray misted over the forward gun mounts. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the early haze. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton stood on the bridge studying the tactical plot. His weathered face showed the strain of months in combat waters. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His uniform bore salt stains from countless hours on deck. This ship carried 336 men and an arsenal designed specifically for anti-aircraft warfare. 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns mounted in 3 twin turrets. 12 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannons. 11 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The mathematics of survival were written in rates of fire and ammunition capacity. Traditional single aircraft attacks achieved kill rates of less than 2% against properly defended destroyers. Mass kamikaze attacks had raised that percentage to 18.6, but what approached Laffey would shatter all statistical models. Beckton carried bitter experience with kamikaze attacks. As executive officer of destroyer Aaron Ward, he had witnessed the first USS Laffey's destruction at Guadalcanal in November 1942. He watched her engage the Japanese battleship Hiei at point-blank range. 20 feet separated the ships when 14-inch shells tore the destroyer apart. 5 months later, as Aaron Ward's commanding officer, Beckton watched his own ship sink under Japanese dive bombers. The Navy's decision to give him command of the second destroyer named Laffey seemed either cruel irony or divine providence. Under his relentless training regimen, The crew had achieved gunnery scores ranking among the highest in the Pacific Fleet. They would need every fraction of that proficiency in the next hour. Aboard the approaching Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, the pilot checked his fuel gauge one final time. The needle showed enough for the one-way trip. His hands moved over familiar controls. Throttle, stick, bomb release mechanism. The 750-kilogram bomb beneath his fuselage was armed and ready. His official mission was reconnaissance, probe American defenses, report ship positions and escort strength, return to base with intelligence for the main attack. But this pilot had other intentions burning in his heart. Like thousands of Special Attack Corps volunteers, he had written his final letters home. The rice paper bore careful brush strokes expressing love and duty. He had drunk his ceremonial sake in the pre-dawn darkness. The rice wine tasted bitter on his tongue. He had tied his hachimaki headband bearing the rising sun around his forehead. There would be no return flight to report intelligence. This would be a one-way mission to eternity. American radar operators tracked the Val as it circled at 8,000 yards, just beyond effective gun range. The aircraft moved in lazy circles like a buzzard studying carrion. In the Combat Information Center below the bridge, Lieutenant Lloyd Hull monitored the ship's sophisticated radar systems. The SK Air Search radar could detect aircraft at 60 miles. The SG Surface Search radar tracked surface contacts at 22 miles. Electronic eyes that never blinked or tired. But technology had harsh limitations. Low-flying aircraft could slip under the radar's coverage. Multiple simultaneous attacks could overwhelm operators' ability to track individual targets. The newest Japanese tactic used high-altitude decoys to draw fighter cover away, while low-level attackers struck from unexpected angles. At 07:30 hours, the Val began its approach run. Mount 51 swung to track the target with mechanical precision. The turret's electric motors whined as the guns elevated. Gun Captain Gunner's mate, Lawrence Delikowski, had drilled his crew until they could load, aim, and fire in under 3 seconds. The mount's radar-directed Mark 37 fire control system calculated range, speed, bearing, and altitude automatically. It adjusted for wind speed and direction, ship movement and pitch, even barrel wear from previous rounds fired. The mechanical computer was a marvel of analog engineering. It solved ballistic equations that would take human gunners precious minutes to calculate by hand. But at maximum range, even with radar direction, hitting a maneuvering aircraft traveling over 200 miles per hour required equal measures of skill and luck. The Val's pilot flew erratically, jinking left and right to spoil fire control solutions. At 07:34 hours, the Val turned away without attacking. A probe, a test of American reactions. Or perhaps the pilot had lost his nerve at the crucial moment. Fear could break even the most dedicated kamikaze at the last second. But radar screens already showed new contacts materializing from the northern horizon. Many contacts. The main attack force approached like storm clouds gathering. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet on Kyushu, had authorized the launch of over 350 aircraft for Kikusui No. 8. Pilots had been briefed on priority targets during the pre-dawn briefing. Radar picket destroyers provided early warning for the main fleet. Destroy the pickets, and the carriers would be blind and vulnerable. The tactical importance of Radar Picket Station No. 1 made Laffey the primary target. At 0827 hours, Laffey's radar detected multiple groups of aircraft approaching from north and northwest, estimated 50-plus contacts. The green blips multiplied across the scope like deadly bacteria. Commander Becton immediately requested fighter support from the Combat Air Patrol. 4 F-6F Hellcats and 2 F-4U Corsairs were vectored toward the incoming raid. But they were 12 miles away and would need precious minutes to intercept. Time measured in heartbeats and seconds. The two-plane cap assigned directly to Laffey had lost radio contact and was nowhere to be seen. The destroyer would face the initial assault alone. The first wave consisted of 4 Aichi D-3A Vals approaching in coordinated attack pattern. The formation had been perfected through 3 years of Pacific combat. 2 aircraft would attack from the bow, forcing the ship to turn and expose her beam to the other 2 attacking from astern. It was tactics refined through the sacrifice of hundreds of pilots who learned what worked and what failed. Their knowledge transmitted back to training bases before their final missions. This created constantly evolving doctrine of suicide attack methods. At 0830 hours, the 4 Vals split into pairs and began their attack runs. Becton ordered flank speed and hard left rudder. The ship heeled sharply as 35,000 horsepower drove her through the emergency turn. Her hull groaned under stress. Steel plates flexed. The maneuver would bring more guns to bear while presenting a narrower target profile. But it also committed the ship to a predictable course for crucial seconds. Mount 51 and 52, the forward 5-inch turrets, opened fire first. The distinctive crack of 5-inch 38 caliber guns echoed across the water. Each shell contained a time delay fuse that would detonate the projectile at predetermined range. The explosion created expanding clouds of razor-sharp shrapnel designed to shred aircraft aluminum and kill pilots. The key was calculating correct fuse timing. Too early and the shrapnel cloud would dissipate harmlessly. Too late, and the shell would pass by without effect. Fire Controlman Second Class Glenn Rader watched through his rangefinder as the first Val bored in from the starboard bow. The aircraft grew larger in his optical sight. At 2,000 yards, the 40mm guns joined the barrage. The Swedish-designed Bofors fired 2-pound explosive shells at 120 rounds per minute. The distinctive pom-pom-pom sound mixed with the boom of 5-inch guns. The cacophony was deafening. Gun crews communicated through hand signals and desperate gestures. At 1,000 yards, the 20mm Oerlikon guns opened fire. These Swiss-designed cannons could fire 450 rounds per minute. They created virtual walls of lead and tracer fire. Gunner's mate third-class Warren Walker, strapped into his 20mm mount, watched his tracers arc toward the incoming Val. The aircraft seemed to hang suspended in air, growing larger with terrifying slowness despite its actual speed exceeding 200 miles per hour. Walker could see the pilot's leather helmet, the rising sun emblems painted on the wings, the bomb slung beneath the fuselage like a deadly egg. The first Val shuddered under multiple 40mm hits. Pieces of aluminum skin and engine cowling flew off in glittering streams. The port wing separated at the root with a sharp crack audible over the gunfire. The aircraft cartwheeled into the ocean 400 yards off the starboard beam. Its bomb detonated on impact with the water. The explosion sent a geyser of spray over Laffey's forward gun mounts. Seawater rained down on the crews. 1 aircraft down, 3 more boring in with deadly determination. The second Val, pressing its attack from the port bow, flew directly into concentrated barrage from Mount 52. A 5-inch shell detonated directly beneath the aircraft. The shrapnel cloud shredded the fuselage and killed the pilot instantly. Blood sprayed across the cockpit canopy. The Val nosed over and crashed 300 yards to port. 2 aircraft down. The third Val, attacking from astern, released its bomb at 500 yards before multiple 20-millimeter hits set the engine ablaze. Orange flames streamed back from the cowling. The bomb splashed harmlessly 50 yards astern as the burning aircraft crashed into Laffey's foaming wake. 3 aircraft destroyed. The fourth Val made the fatal mistake of approaching at constant angle and altitude. This made fire control calculations simple for experienced gunners. Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret, under Chief Gunner's mate Wayne Schaffer, put 3 shells into the aircraft at 800 yards. The Val disintegrated in mid-air. Wings separated from fuselage. The engine tumbled separately. Debris rained across the ocean surface in a wide pattern. 4 aircraft destroyed in 3 minutes of intense combat. In the Combat Information Center, Lieutenant Hull marked 4 kills on his plotting board. Red X marks over green radar contacts. But the radar scope showed no respite coming. More aircraft approached in larger numbers. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. The 8-plane combat air patrol providing high cover had been decoyed away by Japanese fighters. Classic misdirection. The 2-plane low-cap remained out of radio contact. For the next critical minutes, the destroyer would depend entirely on her own guns and the skill of her crew. At 08:39 hours, the main body of the attack force arrived like an avalanche of steel and fury. Unlike the first wave's coordinated assault, these aircraft attacked in rapid succession from multiple directions. The tactic made it impossible for fire control systems to engage all targets effectively. This approach had been developed through careful analysis of American anti-aircraft procedures. Gun directors could only track one target at a time. Manual gun mounts required precious seconds to traverse to new targets. Ammunition handlers could only maintain maximum rate of fire for limited periods before exhaustion set in. The fifth attacker was a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber. It approached from dead ahead at wave-top height, below the depression limits of the 5-inch guns. Becton ordered emergency flank speed and hard right rudder. He was trying to unmask his aft batteries for better fields of fire. The 20-millimeter gunners forward fired desperately at the incoming aircraft. Their tracers created a lethal web of intersecting fire. Red lines of death crisscrossed the morning sky. The Judy pilot held his course despite taking multiple hits. Aluminum fragments flew from his wings. Engine oil streamed back in black ribbons. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up sharply. He was attempting to crash directly into the bridge. Quartermaster Futrides watched from the bridge wing as the Judy's propeller seemed to fill his entire field of vision. The spinning blades caught morning sunlight. Death approached at 200 miles per hour. At the last possible second, the aircraft stalled. Whether from battle damage or pilot error would never be known. The Judy's port wing clipped the port yard arm and spun the aircraft around violently. It crashed into the water just 20 yards to port. The explosion showered the bridge with burning aviation fuel and twisted debris. Futrides felt searing heat wash over him as he pressed against the steel bulkhead. Burning fuel splattered across the deck. The acrid smoke stung his eyes and throat. Before the crew could recover from this near miss, the sixth attacker was already upon them. Another Judy approached from the starboard quarter at an angle that masked it from most of the ship's guns. Only Mount 53 and the aft 40-millimeter mounts could bear on this target. The aircraft released its bomb at 300 yards, close enough to see the pilot's face behind his goggles. Becton ordered hard left rudder, but physics and momentum worked against him. The bomb struck anyway. It penetrated the main deck between the two stacks with a tremendous crash. The explosion erupted in the after-crew's quarters below. The blast killed 2 men instantly and started fierce fires that threatened 40mm ammunition stored nearby. The seventh aircraft, another Val approaching from port, flew into a concentrated wall of fire from the port side 20mm guns. Seaman First Class Robert Carr, manning gun 23, held his trigger down despite his weapon beginning to overheat. The barrel glowed cherry red. Sustained fire paid off dramatically. The Val's engine erupted in orange flames that streamed back over the cockpit. The aircraft crashed close aboard to port, so close that burning aviation gasoline splashed across Laffey's deck, starting new fires that damage control parties had to fight while under continued attack. The eighth attacker achieved complete surprise through careful timing. A Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bomber, though carrying bombs rather than torpedoes, approached from astern. It was hidden in the dense smoke from previous attacks. Black clouds provided perfect concealment. The aircraft was almost directly overhead before anyone spotted it. Gunner's mate Calvin Clower, manning a 40mm mount, swung his weapon around desperately. The electric traverse motor whined under maximum load, but he couldn't bring the guns to bear fast enough. The Kate crashed directly into Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret, at 08:42 hours. The impact was catastrophic beyond description. The Kate's 250-kilogram bomb detonated on contact. The explosion blew the entire top off the turret and killed everyone inside instantly. This included Chief Schaffer and his entire gun crew of 8 men. Burning aviation fuel poured through the shattered turret into the handling rooms below. The ready ammunition began cooking off from the intense heat. 5-inch shells rocketed randomly across the fantail like deadly fireworks. One shell punched through the deck and exploded in the steering gear room below. The blast jammed the rudder 26 degrees to port. Laffey began circling helplessly, locked in a left turn at 25 knots. Becton immediately ordered engines stopped, but momentum carried the ship through another complete circle before she finally slowed. The loss of steering control couldn't have come at a worse time. 3 more aircraft were already beginning their attack runs from different directions. The ship was now wounded and partially defenseless. The 9th attacker, another Val, approached from the starboard beam. With the ship circling uncontrollably and Mount 53 destroyed, defensive fire was significantly reduced. The Val bored in steadily, taking hits from 40mm guns but maintaining its attack run with grim determination. At the last second, concentrated defensive fire from starboard 20mm guns cut the aircraft's control cables. The Val rolled inverted and crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship. Its bomb detonated underwater, lifting Laffey's stern completely out of the water for several seconds. The 10th aircraft almost ended Laffey's fight completely. Another Judy approached from astern where the destroyed Mount 53 could no longer provide defensive fire. With the rudder jammed and the ship still making slow circles, Becton couldn't maneuver to unmask his remaining guns effectively. The Judy released its bomb from 200 yards. The weapon struck the fantail, blowing an 8 by 10-foot hole in the deck. The explosion killed 6 men manning the aft 20mm guns. Among the dead was signalman Bill Kelly, who had been attempting to rig an emergency steering system. It was 08:45 hours. In 13 minutes, Laffey had been hit by 2 bombs and 1 kamikaze aircraft. 6 more aircraft had been shot down just short of the ship. But the savage attack was far from over. Radar showed more aircraft approaching like deadly locusts. The ship's defensive capabilities were seriously degraded. Mount 53 was completely destroyed. The rudder remained jammed in hard left position. Fires burned in 3 separate locations. Ammunition was running dangerously low on several gun mounts. Casualties were mounting steadily. already 15 dead and 26 wounded. The 11th attacker marked a crucial turning point in the desperate battle. Another Val approached from the port bow, but this time Laffey wasn't fighting alone. 4 Marine F-4U Corsairs from Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 441, launched from Yantan Airfield on Okinawa, arrived just as the Val began its final attack run. Captain Robert Klingman's Corsair caught the Val at 500 feet altitude. His 650 caliber machine guns shredded the Japanese aircraft's tail section completely. The Val spiraled into the ocean, trailing black smoke. It was the first aircraft Laffey hadn't had to destroy herself, but the Marine fighters couldn't be everywhere at once. The 12th attacker, a Judy approaching from the starboard quarter, slipped through while the Corsairs were engaged elsewhere. This kamikaze pilot wouldn't miss his target. At 0847 hours, the Judy crashed into the afterdeck house between the two stacks. Its bomb penetrated the deck and exploded in the after engine room below. The blast ruptured high-pressure steam lines, filling the compartment with superheated vapor at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Machinist's mate, George Logan, and 3 other men were literally cooked alive in the scalding steam. Their screams echoed briefly through the engine room before being cut short. The explosion also knocked out the after-fire room, reducing the ship's maximum speed to 12 knots. Chief Machinist's mate, George Weiss, in the forward engine room, felt the ship shudder from the tremendous impact. He knew from the sudden loss of steam pressure that the after-engine room was completely gone. Working in temperatures exceeding 130 degrees, Weiss and his remaining men struggled desperately to maintain steam pressure. Without speed, Laffey would become a sitting duck for the remaining attackers. They had to keep the forward plant running no matter what happened above. The 13th attacker appeared from nowhere, like a deadly phantom. A twin-engine Yokosuka P-1Y Francis bomber approached at high speed from dead astern. With Mount 53 destroyed and most of the aft 20mm guns knocked out, Laffey had almost no defense against attacks from that quarter. The Francis bored in steadily, its pilot clearly intending to crash directly into the bridge structure. At 200 yards, a Marine Corsair, piloted by Lieutenant Richard Corset, dove from above. He fired a long burst into the Francis's starboard engine. The bomber yawed violently to the right, missing Laffey's stern by less than 10 feet before crashing into the churning ocean. The 14th aircraft nearly succeeded where all others had failed. An Oscar fighter approached from the port beam at maximum speed. The aircraft moved so fast that gun directors couldn't track it effectively. Their mechanical computers couldn't solve the fire control problem quickly enough. Mount 51 managed to fire 3 rounds, but all missed by wide margins. The Oscar's pilot aimed directly for the bridge, clearly trying to decapitate the ship's entire command structure. At the last possible second, gunner's mate 2nd Class Robert Fenwick, manning a port-side 40mm mount, achieved a miraculous hit on the Oscar's tail section. The aircraft yawed sharply left. Its wing clipped the ship's main mast, shearing off the port yard arm along with the American flag. The Oscar crashed close aboard to port in a tremendous explosion of spray and debris. At 0848 hours, there was a brief respite in the savage assault. No aircraft were visible in the immediate area, though radar continued to show more contacts approaching from the north. Becton used this momentary break to assess the devastating damage to his ship. The reports were grimmer than he had feared. Mount 53 destroyed with all hands killed, steering control completely lost, after engine room flooded and abandoned, multiple fires burning out of control, 32 men confirmed dead, and the count was still rising. Over 50 wounded, many seriously. Ammunition running critically low on several gun mounts, and still more aircraft, approaching for another attack wave. Lieutenant Frank Manson, the ship's communications officer, approached Becton with obvious reluctance. His face was blackened with smoke and streaked with sweat. Should they prepare to abandon ship while they still had time? Becton's response would become legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. His words were heard by dozens of men and repeated countless times. "Hell no, Frank. We still have guns that can shoot. I'll never abandon ship as long as a gun will fire." Nearby, a lookout muttered under his breath, adding his own postscript to the captain's defiant words. "And if I can find one man to fire it." The brief respite ended abruptly with the arrival of the 15th attacker. Another Val approached from high altitude, diving directly out of the brilliant morning sun. It was the classic attack angle used since the very beginning of aerial warfare. The sun's harsh glare made it impossible for lookouts to spot the aircraft until it was already committed to its dive. The Val released its bomb from 1,000 feet altitude. Becton instinctively ordered hard right rudder, forgetting momentarily that steering control had been lost. The ship continued its slow left circle as the bomb struck the water just 10 yards to port. The underwater explosion sent deadly shrapnel through the ship's thin hull plating. 4 more men were wounded by the flying metal fragments. The 16th aircraft presented an even greater threat. A Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber approached from the starboard beam. The twin-engine bomber was far larger than any single-engine attacker Laffey had faced. It approached at 200 feet altitude, too low for the 5-inch guns to depress and engage. Every available 40 and 20 millimeter gun that could bear opened fire immediately. The Betty's larger size made it an easier target to hit, but it could also absorb far more battle damage before going down. Tracers poured into the bomber's fuselage and wings like deadly rain. One engine burst into bright orange flames, then the other engine caught fire as well. Still, the Betty continued its attack run with mechanical precision. At 300 yards, the pilot released 2 bombs. Both weapons missed, straddling the ship closely but causing no direct damage. But the bomber itself, now completely engulfed in roaring flames, continued straight toward Laffey's superstructure. The aircraft's left wing suddenly tilted downward. No one would ever know if this happened because the controls failed or because the pilot had died. The Betty bomber swept directly over Mount 52. It flew so low that the 5-inch gun crew threw themselves flat against the deck. The burning aircraft slammed into the ocean on the port side. Its flaming wreckage bounced across the water like a stone skipped by a giant hand. Fire and twisted metal scattered in all directions. Steam hissed where hot debris met cold seawater. The 17th attacker succeeded where 16 others had failed. It scored a direct hit on one of Laffey's primary gun positions. An Oscar fighter screamed toward them from dead ahead. It approached at tremendous speed. The pilot released his bomb at the perfect moment. The explosive struck Mount 52 with devastating force. The blast didn't punch through the turret's thick armor plating, but the massive concussion killed 3 men instantly inside the mount. 5 others suffered serious wounds. The mount captain was among the injured. Blood splattered the interior walls. The smell of burned flesh filled the confined space. Men screamed in agony and terror. The turret fell silent. Its guns would fire no more. Mount 52 was completely out of action. This cut Laffey's forward firepower in half. By 8:50 in the morning, Laffey was fighting for her life. Only Mount 51 remained fully operational of her 3 5-inch gun positions. Half the 40 millimeter guns lay in twisted ruins or suffered critical damage. Most of the 20 millimeter weapons were silent. Fires burned without control throughout the ship. Smoke poured from multiple locations. The destroyer could only make 8 knots through the water. Her jammed rudder forced her to circle helplessly like a wounded animal. The radar screens showed more aircraft approaching fast. Death was closing in from all directions. The 18th attacker should have delivered the killing blow. A Val dive bomber approached from the perfect angle. It aimed for the stern, where the ship had no remaining defensive weapons. The area was completely exposed. The pilot lined up his attack run with deadly precision. His aircraft dove toward the helpless destroyer. Victory seemed certain. Then salvation appeared from above. 2 Marine Corsairs plunged from the sky like avenging angels. Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick and Lieutenant Robert Cowden caught the Val in a deadly crossfire. Their combined 50-caliber machine guns tore the Japanese aircraft apart. Bullets shredded wings and fuselage. The kill happened so close to Laffey that burning debris from the destroyed aircraft rained down on the destroyer's deck. Twisted metal clanged against steel plating. The 19th aircraft was another Judy dive bomber. It approached from the port quarter at high speed. Laffey's gun crews were completely exhausted by now. They had been firing continuously for over 20 minutes. Their bodies ached from the constant recoil. Sweat poured down their faces despite the morning chill. Gun barrels glowed red-hot from overheating. Ammunition supplies were running dangerously low. Several guns had jammed completely from the sustained rate of fire. Mechanisms designed for intermittent use were failing under constant stress. The Judy bore in steadily. It took multiple hits, but maintained its attack run. Holes appeared in its wings and fuselage, but the pilot kept coming with suicidal determination. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up sharply. He tried to crash into the bridge from above. The aircraft climbed steeply toward the ship's command center. A lucky burst from gun mount 44 caught the Judy's wing root. The critical hit severed control cables and fuel lines. The aircraft rolled hard to the right. It crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship's hull. Water erupted in a massive column. Shrapnel peppered Laffey's already damaged sides. At 8:51, the 20th attacker arrived on scene. Another Val approached from the starboard side. This pilot had watched his comrades die one by one. He had learned from their mistakes. He approached at constantly changing altitudes and angles. The aircraft jinked left and right continuously. This threw off the gunner's aim completely. The few operational guns that could still turn and fire shot desperately. But their accuracy suffered badly from exhaustion and battle damage. Smoke obscured vision. Equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. The Val released its bomb from 300 yards out. The weapon struck the water close aboard the ship. The explosion sent more deadly shrapnel into Laffey's already perforated hull. Metal fragments whistled through the air like angry wasps. The 21st aircraft nearly accomplished what 20 others had failed to achieve. Another Judy remained hidden in the thick smoke from Laffey's fires. It approached from the stern completely undetected by lookouts and radar. The first warning came as the roar of its engine passed over the fantail. The aircraft flew at only 50 feet altitude. The Judy released its bomb at point-blank range. There was no time to take evasive action. The weapon struck the deck just forward of the destroyed Mount 53. It penetrated through the steel plating into the after-ammunition handling room. The bomb exploded with catastrophic force deep inside the ship. 5-inch ammunition began detonating in a devastating chain reaction. Shell after shell exploded in rapid succession. The after part of the ship erupted in flame and smoke. The blast was heard for miles across the ocean. Shrapnel sliced through damage control parties trying to fight the spreading fires. Men were cut down without warning. Among the dead was Ensign Robert Thompson. He had left his protected station in the Combat Information Center. He was leading a repair party when the explosion occurred. Thompson would receive a posthumous Navy Cross for his ultimate sacrifice. The massive explosion also ruptured the fire main system. Water pressure to the after part of the ship was completely cut off. Without water to fight the raging fires, damage control parties resorted to desperate measures. They threw burning debris overboard with their bare hands. Men wrapped rags around their hands for minimal protection. They grabbed red-hot shell casings and hurled them over the side. Others used their own bodies to smother flames. They rolled on the deck to extinguish burning clothing and equipment. The smell of burned flesh mixed with cordite and smoke. The 22nd and final attacker was a Val approaching from the port bow. The time was 8:53 in the morning. By this point, Laffey was barely capable of fighting back at all. Only Mount 51 and a handful of automatic weapons remained in action. The ship was dead in the water. Fires burned furiously throughout her length. She listed heavily to port from extensive flooding. Commander Beckton watched the Val approach with grim determination. He knew his ship had almost nothing left to stop this final attack. The end seemed inevitable after such a prolonged battle. But Laffey wasn't fighting alone anymore. 4 Navy F-6F Hellcats from Fighter Squadron 10 finally arrived on scene. They had launched from the carrier Intrepid at maximum speed. The fighters caught the Val at 1,000 yards range. Lieutenant John Mitchell's Hellcats pumped hundreds of rounds into the Val's engine compartment. 50 caliber bullets tore through aluminum and steel. The aircraft burst into flames immediately and crashed into the ocean 500 yards from Laffey. The long attack was finally over. 80 minutes of concentrated hell had ended at last. USS Laffey had faced 22 aircraft in the most intense kamikaze attack of the entire Pacific War. The statistics were staggering and almost unbelievable. 6 kamikaze aircraft had crashed directly into the ship. 4 bombs had scored direct hits on critical areas. The destroyer had been strafed repeatedly by machine gun fire. Yet somehow, impossibly, she remained afloat and fighting. 32 men were dead from the crew. 71 others suffered wounds of varying severity. The ship was a burning, flooding wreck, barely recognizable, but she had survived against all odds. The mathematics of the engagement were truly staggering to contemplate. Of the 22 attacking aircraft, Laffey's guns had shot down 8. Marine and Navy fighters had destroyed another 8 in aerial combat. 6 had either crashed into the ship or scored bomb hits. Never before or after would a single warship face such concentrated kamikaze attacks and survive. Statistical models created after the war suggested the probability of survival was less than 1%. Yet Laffey had beaten those incredible odds through superior training and tactics. The combination of innovative defensive measures, raw courage, and perhaps some measure of luck had saved the ship. Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Charles Holloway would later analyze the attack with mathematical precision. His report became a classic study of naval combat. The average interval between individual aircraft attacks was 3 minutes and 38 seconds. The longest gap between attacks was 8 minutes. The shortest interval was only 45 seconds between aircraft. At the peak of the assault, Laffey was engaging a new attacker every 90 seconds. This continued for nearly 15 minutes straight. No ship in naval history had ever sustained such intensive attacks and survived. The technological factors were equally significant in the outcome. Laffey's Mark 37 gun directors equipped with sophisticated analog computers, had enabled the 5-inch guns to engage targets with unprecedented accuracy. The complex mechanical calculating machines could track multiple targets simultaneously. The proximity-fused shells were a secret weapon that detonated automatically when near aircraft. This dramatically increased the probability of scoring hits. The Bofors 40mm guns, with their high rate of fire and explosive shells, had provided crucial middle-layer defense. Even the humble 20mm Oerlikon guns, though often criticized as inadequate, had shot down several attackers at close range. But advanced technology alone hadn't saved Laffey from destruction. The human factor proved decisive in the ship's survival. Commander Becton's tactical brilliance in maneuvering his damaged ship had been crucial. The gun crews continued firing even as their shipmates died around them. Damage control parties fought fires with their bare hands when equipment failed. The engineers kept the propulsion plant running under hellish conditions. Radar operators tracked multiple targets through thick smoke and chaos. Every man stayed at his post when every natural instinct screamed to seek cover. The Japanese had committed their best pilots and aircraft to this attack. These weren't the inexperienced Toko volunteers of late 1945. Those later pilots received only a few hours of flight training before their final mission. The pilots attacking Laffey were skilled aviators who had chosen death over defeat. Their tactical coordination, particularly in the early stages of the attack, showed sophisticated understanding of American defensive capabilities. They used smoke and sun glare for concealment with great skill. The multi-axis attacks were designed to overwhelm fire control systems. The targeting of command and control structures showed tactical intelligence. These innovative tactics would be studied intensively after the war. They were incorporated into post-war naval aviation doctrine worldwide. The immediate tactical impact of the attack was significant for both sides. The loss of Laffey from Radar Picket Station No. 1 created a dangerous gap. This hole in the early warning network threatened the invasion fleet, but her survival sent a more important strategic message. If a single destroyer could survive 22 kamikaze attacks, then the Japanese strategy was failing. The concept of trading lives for ships wasn't working. The mathematics of attrition that had seemed to favor Japan was being negated. Japan possessed thousands of aircraft versus hundreds of American ships, but American defensive capabilities and damage control expertise were proving superior. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded amphibious forces at Okinawa. He would later state that Laffey's survival was the single most important factor in maintaining fleet morale. This occurred during the height of the Kamikaze offensive when losses were mounting. If Laffey could survive such an unprecedented attack, any ship could survive. The psychological impact on American sailors was immeasurable. Many had begun to dread radar picket duty as a virtual death sentence. Laffey's survival proved that ships could fight back successfully. The Japanese reaction was equally telling about their situation. Radio intercepts revealed serious morale problems among Special Attack Corps pilots. The failure to sink Laffey, despite the unprecedented concentration of attackers, was devastating. If 22 aircraft couldn't sink a single destroyer, how many would it take? The mathematical equation that justified kamikaze tactics was proven false. One pilot and plane for one enemy ship was impossible to achieve. Vice Admiral Ugaki reviewed the after-action reports with growing concern. He realized the tactical implications immediately. His diary entry for April 16th was revealing. Despite the brave sacrifice of our special attack warriors, the enemy destroyer survived. This shows the limitations of body crash tactics against well-defended targets. We must reconsider our entire approach to these operations. Within weeks, Japanese tactics shifted significantly toward attacking transports and supply ships. They avoided heavily armed warships whenever possible. This was a tacit admission that the kamikaze strategy had reached its limits. The technological lessons learned were immediately incorporated into American naval construction programs. The Allen M. Sumner-class destroyers like Laffey, with their twin 5-inch mounts and heavy anti-aircraft batteries, became the template. All post-war destroyer designs followed this pattern. The effectiveness of proximity-fused ammunition was definitively proven in combat. The importance of redundant damage control systems was validated completely. Every major navy in the world studied Laffey's detailed action report. They incorporated her hard-learned lessons into their own tactical doctrines. But perhaps the most important lesson was about human factors. In an age of increasing technological sophistication, mechanical computers and radar systems were revolutionizing warfare. Yet the survival of USS Laffey proved that the human element remained absolutely decisive. Training, leadership, courage, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. These were the same qualities that had enabled wooden ships to defeat iron ones. They had allowed David to defeat Goliath in ancient times. They still mattered in the age of radar and guided weapons. The repair statistics following the battle told their own compelling story. Laffey required 4 full months in dry dock to repair all the battle damage. Over 300 tons of damaged steel were cut away and replaced. The entire after section of the ship was essentially rebuilt from scratch. The total cost exceeded $3 million. This was more than a third of the ship's original construction cost, but the Navy considered it money extremely well spent. Laffey had proven that American ships could take unprecedented punishment and still survive. The human cost was sobering, but not completely devastating. 32 dead from a crew of 336 represented less than 10% killed. This survival rate was remarkable, considering the ship was hit by 6 kamikaze aircraft and 4 bombs. Several factors contributed to this relatively low casualty rate. Commander Becton's emphasis on damage control training was crucial. The crew's extensive experience from previous combat operations proved invaluable. The superior design of the Allen M. Sumner class provided better armor and compartmentalization. This was a significant improvement over earlier destroyer designs. Perhaps most importantly, the extraordinary performance of the ship's medical team made a difference. Dr. Matthew Darnell continued operating on wounded men even as bombs exploded around him. His dedication saved many lives that day. Individual acts of heroism during the battle were too numerous to catalog fully. Gunner's mate Lawrence Delosky remained at his post in Mount 51 despite multiple shrapnel wounds. He personally accounted for 3 of the 8 aircraft shot down by ship's guns. Machinist's mate George Wise kept the forward engines running throughout the attack. He worked in temperatures that literally blistered paint off bulkheads. His efforts kept the ship maneuverable when it mattered most. Quartermaster Ari Futrides maintained the ship's log throughout the entire battle. He provided the detailed record that allowed historians to reconstruct events accurately. His clinical documentation captured every moment of the 80-minute ordeal. Seaman Calvin Cloyer manned a 40mm gun after its entire crew was killed or wounded. He shot down one attacker before being seriously wounded himself. His selfless action helped protect his shipmates. The story of Lieutenant T.W. Runk deserved special mention in any account. As damage control officer, Runk had perhaps the most dangerous job during the attack. He moved constantly through the ship to assess battle damage. During this hazardous work, Runk discovered an unexploded bomb on the main deck. The 250-kilogram weapon had failed to detonate on impact. Without a moment's hesitation, Runk picked up the bomb with his bare hands. He threw the deadly weapon overboard before it could explode. The bomb detonated seconds after hitting the water. It exploded close enough that shrapnel peppered the ship's hull again. Had the weapon detonated on deck, the additional damage might have been fatal. The supporting ships at Radar Picket Station No. 1 also played crucial roles. LCSL 51, commanded by Lieutenant Howell Chickering, was credited with shooting down 6 aircraft. The small vessel would receive a Presidential Unit citation for her actions. Her gunfire support during the height of the attack was instrumental. This came when Laffey's own guns were being systematically knocked out. LCSL 116 rescued 22 Laffey sailors who had been blown overboard by explosions. Many of these men were severely burned and would have drowned. Without the swift action of her crew, the death toll would have been significantly higher. The fighter pilots who eventually arrived also deserved full recognition for their efforts. Marine Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick was officially credited with 3 kills during the battle. Navy Lieutenant John Mitchell shot down 2 attacking aircraft. Their arrival at the critical moment probably saved the ship from destruction. Laffey's defenses were nearly exhausted when the fighters appeared. The failure of the original combat air patrol to provide coverage had serious consequences. The fighters had been decoyed away by Japanese diversionary aircraft. This tactical mistake would lead to significant changes in fighter direction doctrine. Never again would radar picket destroyers be left without continuous fighter cover. The broader implications for the Pacific War were profound and far-reaching. Operation Kikusui had committed over 300 aircraft to attacks on April 16th. The loss of 22 aircraft to achieve only moderate damage to a single destroyer represented an unacceptable exchange rate. Japan had approximately 3,000 operational aircraft remaining in their inventory. At this demonstrated rate of exchange, they would be exhausted completely. This would happen long before inflicting decisive damage on the massive invasion fleet. The mathematical equation was absolutely inexorable. Japan could not win a war of attrition. The American response was swift and decisive once the lessons were absorbed. Admiral Chester Nimitz reviewed Laffey's detailed action report carefully. He ordered immediate changes to radar picket procedures throughout the theater. Destroyers would no longer operate singly in exposed positions. Instead, they would work in mutually supporting groups for better defense. Fighter coverage would be continuous and multi-layered around the clock. Emergency repair ships would be stationed much closer to picket stations. These changes were implemented within days of the battle. They dramatically reduced losses during subsequent Kikusui operations. The Japanese also drew important lessons from the engagement. Unfortunately for them, the lessons were largely negative. The concentration of attacks on a single ship had failed completely. It sacrificed irreplaceable pilots and aircraft for minimal results. Future operations would employ more dispersed tactics instead. They would attack multiple targets simultaneously to prevent concentration of defensive fire. But this dispersal also reduced the probability of achieving decisive damage to any single target. It was a tactical paradox with no good solution available. Admiral Soemu Toyota commanded the combined fleet at this time. He would later admit that the failure to sink Laffey marked a crucial turning point. The Kamikaze attacks had been Japan's last realistic hope. They needed to inflict enough damage to make Americans reconsider invasion plans. If maximum effort couldn't sink a single destroyer, there was no hope. The vast invasion fleet assembled for Operation Downfall could not be stopped. The atomic bombs that ended the war 4 months later merely punctuated this conclusion. The outcome was already evident to thoughtful observers. The long-term impact on naval warfare doctrine was truly revolutionary. The action definitively proved that surface ships could survive mass air attacks. This required proper equipment and extensive training of crews. This principle would influence Cold War naval construction programs significantly. Ships were designed around layered air defense systems. The Aegis combat system, with its ability to track and engage multiple targets simultaneously, was a direct descendant. Every modern warship's emphasis on point defense weapons and damage control can trace its lineage back to lessons learned off Okinawa. The human legacy of the battle was equally enduring over time. Laffey's crew formed one of the most active veteran associations in naval history. They held regular reunions for over 60 years after the war. Their unofficial motto, "We who survived," spoke to more than physical survival. It acknowledged the psychological burden of being among the few to face such an attack and live. Many crew members suffered what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The clinical term didn't exist in 1945. The Navy's modern understanding of combat stress and its proper treatment owes much to studying survivors. Veterans like Laffey's crew provided crucial insights into psychological warfare effects. Commander Becton would go on to achieve the rank of Rear Admiral. His tactical innovations during the Kamikaze attack were studied at naval war colleges worldwide. His memoir, The Ship That Would Not Die, became required reading. Every midshipman at Annapolis studied the battle in detail, but Becton always insisted that credit belonged entirely to his crew. In a 1975 interview, he stated his position clearly. "I gave the orders, but those boys carried them out completely. They're the ones who actually saved the ship." Any commander would have been proud to lead such magnificent men. The ship herself would serve for another 30 years after the war. She participated in the Korean War and various Cold War operations. Laffey was finally decommissioned in 1975. Unlike most decommissioned destroyers, which were scrapped or used for target practice, Laffey was preserved. Since 1982, she has been moored at Patriots Point Naval Museum in South Carolina. Visitors can walk her decks and see battle damage still visible in her hull. The after 5-inch mount, Mount 53, was never repaired after the war. It remains as a permanent memorial to the 6 men who died there. Modern naval historians continue to debate how Laffey survived when statistics said she shouldn't have. Some point to the mathematical improbability of her survival as evidence of divine intervention. Others cite the cumulative effect of small advantages that created an unlikely outcome. Superior training, innovative tactics, technological edge, and determination all played roles. The truth probably lies somewhere between these explanations. War has always been the realm where careful preparation meets pure chaos. It's where human will confronts mechanical probability and mathematical calculations. What cannot be debated by anyone is the extraordinary courage displayed that day. Japanese pilots chose death over defeat with absolute conviction. American sailors stood their ground against overwhelming odds without flinching. Young men on both sides believed their cause was worth dying for. The tragedy of war is that such courage gets expended in mutual destruction. The lesson of war is that such courage exists in ordinary people. It emerges when they face extraordinary circumstances that test their character. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 16, 1945, USS Laffey had been just another destroyer. She was performing routine radar picket duty in dangerous waters. By noon, she had become something entirely different. She was legend incarnate, the ship that would not die despite everything thrown at her, the destroyer that faced 22 kamikazes and somehow survived. Her story would inspire generations of sailors around the world. She proved that with enough courage, training, and determination, even the impossible becomes achievable. The final entry in Laffey's deck log for April 16, 1945, was characteristically understated. Quartermaster Futrides wrote it as the ship limped toward Karama Retto. The clinical words read, "Sustained multiple enemy air attacks, ship damaged but operational, proceeding to base." Behind those simple words lay 80 minutes of absolute hell. 32 dead shipmates would never go home. But also a story of survival that would echo through naval history. The war would end in 4 months, with Japan's surrender. The Kamikaze attacks would claim many more ships and lives before then. But never again would a single ship face such concentrated assault. Never again would the Japanese achieve such perfect tactical coordination. And never again would the outcome remain in doubt for so long. Laffey had proven that American ships could absorb the worst punishment imaginable and survive. In proving that fundamental point, she had helped win the entire war. Today, the lessons of USS Laffey remain completely relevant to modern warfare. We live in an age of missile warfare and cyber attacks. Military theorists speak of single devastating strikes that can eliminate major combatants instantly. Laffey stands as a powerful reminder that wars are still won by people. Technology alone is never sufficient. Training and preparation can overcome significant numerical disadvantage. Courage and determination can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Sometimes, against all probability and mathematical prediction, the ship that should not survive does exactly that. The mathematics of war are not always destiny written in stone. Sometimes they are merely the odds that must be overcome through human effort.